for me. A very good evening to you all, and happy to welcome you for the third and the final day's session of this workshop titled Pujai Seimurai. A quick recap of what we saw yesterday. We started our yesterday's session discussing about the meanings or difference between the Devatas, as we call them as the Ishtadaivam, Kuladaivam, Kudumba, and the Urdhaivams, and how devotion isn't it's not just devotion is in various different formats exhibited by different devotees, and how it varies from one person to another. Different modes of worship that comes along depending on the gods, where they are installed, how they are to be worshipped, the community that takes care of it, and more. How there are common gods who are much more popular. Apart from that, we have regional gods and local gods. And finally, we were talking about a few suggestions on designing a comfortable space to house your deities and perform your rituals, everyday prayers. We're also talking about individual prayer spaces, family level, and also about temples. So today's session, we're going to discuss in detail about a simple puja procedure that you can probably adapt. To begin with, after deciding about the deity whom you're going to worship, the qualities that comes along with the deity, you'll probably finalize about how the offerings are going to be, what are going to be the offerings, and other norms that are exclusively there for each murti. To begin with, cleanliness, people say, is only next to godliness, but however, they are twins and they get together always. Cleanliness here, a part of it is, of course, being clean from outside, cleaning the place where you're going to do your puja, and having all the vessels that are going to be offered to the gods, and all the offerings especially to be cleaned and kept, washed and wiped and kept. Apart from that, there is also this part where cleaning your internal self, having it very, very clean, is also important. In fact, any ritual begins with meditating upon the deity, requesting him or her to get in you to ensure that your thoughts, your words are all purified, especially your thoughts. Having vengeance in mind and worshipping or having all these negative aspects in us and doing a ritual is not going to fetch any benefits. So we're not sure if we can clean ourselves inside so well. So we request God to help us with good thoughts and positive vibes till such time that we finish the prayer. So apart from cleaning, sweeping and mopping the place and washing all the puja vessels and cleaning the offerings, one needs to clean themselves not only from the outside but also from the inside. And wearing comfortable clothing, depending on the rituals, are all part and parcel of it. Objects of worship, it again depends from one deity to another. However, there are a few that are common. Flowers, for example, are the most basic requirement for any puja, and they are supposed to be fresh and fragrant, and a variety of colors would mean that various different thoughts of yours are being offered. To clarify that part, every flower that is offered at the lotus feet of the Lord is like offering yourself. You make a prayer and you offer the flower, it just means that you've offered all that is needed to fulfill the prayers at his feet. You always are of the one should maintain a mindset where we think nothing is possible by us. There is absolutely nothing which we are capable of. It's all by the blessings that from there, or it is all his plans that we execute here. Yeah, so we have absolutely no power to do anything, and everything that happens around us is because of his blessings. So an offering made at his feet, a flower offered, will only mean that I'm offering myself here along with this prayer. Please give me the strength, help me, support me to ensure that my prayers are answered. These flowers are supposed to be fresh, but when you're traveling, there are a few exceptions. You might just carry akshata, which is basically turmeric powder mixed with rice, white rice, uncooked, of course, and that is supposed to be a dravyam or an equivalent for flowers to be offered. So when you're traveling and you cannot find flowers where you travel, you can always carry a small box of akshatas to be offered. And an exception to Vilvam, Tulasi, and Arugampul is that once offered, they can be removed from the prayer. After the prayer is over, these 3 leaves alone can be collected and it can be reused for the next 6 months to come. Yeah, so there is an exception for Tulasi, Bilvapatram, and Arugampal. That with the long grass that is offered to Ganesha. These 3 leaves alone can be reused for 6 months. So when you're on a travel, a long trip, especially, what we do is we buy some Bilvam and Tulasi, clean them, and we put it outside in shade, and we kind of make it dry and carry it in polythene covers or in cloth bags if you have. Yeah, so I generally do that in my travel. So there is always this Vilvam and handful of Vilvam leaves and Tulasi till such time that it actually crumbles and powders itself. We can keep using it. So after the puja is over, it is carefully packed and only stored safely to be used the next day. So if you feel you have reasons to be posed as constraints, God says, well, there are all these exceptions that He has made for us to make it very, very easy for us and ensure that you don't skip your everyday prayers. So Bilvam, Tulasi, and Arugampal can be carried and reused also. When I travel abroad, the Murti, my worship, the Atma Murti, the Spatika Lingam that I worship is in my hand luggage. Bilvam and other things, sometimes I just drop it in the cabin bag, and at times I face issues where it is removed and thrown off. In some cases, we've managed to get it. So, if you can still continue it. If not, Akshatai, I don't think it's barred. Even in international travel, you can always carry a small box of Akshatai. The leaves that I carry, the dried leaves, is within my domestic travel. When I travel abroad, I prefer just carrying a small box of Akshatai, which can be used for your daily pujas. Then, offerings to be made, flowers and fruits are like bare minimum. Nothing like a bowl full of cooked rice every day. In fact, that used to be the tradition. Cooking at homes was an act of it was an act of worship by itself, because we worship the hob, we worship the Agni that is there, we worship all the grains, of course, and water is worshipped, vegetables, fruits. So when all of these ingredients go into preparing a dish, that by itself is an offering to be made to the God. So when those days, everyday puja at home involved offering our lunch, whatever elaborate lunch that we're eating, all of it will be offered to your deity at home, and then we consume it. So by that, we just ensure that it is nothing but prasadam that we eat every day. All that it needs is some amount of, kind of a perseverance for ourselves to ensure that we cook after we take a shower, if there is a possibility of this. For my Shiva Puja, again, I will, like, when at home, and most of the days I end up doing it as early as 3:30 or 4 in the morning, because my otherwise, other professional commitments that I've got. So all that I have is a small electric cooker only for my Shiva Puja. And it's just set a little before I start my puja, and within the next 30-35 minutes, a bowl full of rice, cooked rice for Shiva's offering is ready. If I have an early morning flight or otherwise, I start my puja as early as 2 or sometimes even at 1:32 and finish my puja, pack the rice for my travel, and I eat it. If not, it is saved for my lunch, and that's how it happens. On festival days, of course, when an elaborate lunch is prepared, all of it is offered to the God. And when I'm traveling and I'm not able to prepare Suddhanam for the daily Shiva Puja, best is carry some dry fruits, or puri is also allowed, flaked rice. That's aval or puri is more than enough too. Even if you don't get fruits, I'm sure a handful of puri should be enough to be offered to your Murti. God is there who understands all our constraints, and He's only interested in knowing that we don't compromise on Him irrespective of the constraints that we face. So 30 minutes of puja is something that all of us can plan. So having dry fruits at home and flowers shouldn't be a problem in most countries, I believe. If there are constraints, again, never mind. By whatever flowers you get, whatever leaves you get, it will still be accepted. Say you're in Canada, you don't get fresh flowers every day. Whatever you get are all these cosmetic looking flowers. Still go ahead and do it. That commitment is still fine. You get a bouquet from a florist every week and offer 1 or 2 flowers from that. It is still fine. Yeah, He knows it all. He is more interested in knowing our commitment and love for Him than reasons to say that I'm facing these constraints and hence I'm not doing any puja. Columns are an integral part of our culture. It has a lot to do with Indian culture, Indian mathematics, concentration. In fact, the creativity theory, in the creativity component that you see there, which is about everything starting from that one single point and developing, and finally when it is over, it all merges into where it started. So that by itself is a very, very strong inbound Indian philosophy that we explore through drawing these columns. And drawing a simple column only enhances the space, and it certainly adds a lot of aesthetic value to however small your puja space is. If you're not sure about drawing a column, you get stencils of various sizes and shapes and designs, and even complicated drawings like a Hridaya Kamalam, and all of it is available today in very clear stencils. Buying that to decorate your puja space, again, shouldn't be a problem on a daily basis. End of the day, all that he expects in fact from us is a leaf, a flower, a fruit. If not, even water is enough. He's not very particular about us offering all the four. Yeah, even one of this is fine. A leaf, just pluck a leaf and offer it to him, he's more than happy. I have seen acharyas who, when they travel and find a beautiful tree with leaves that are very interestingly shaped, they just close their eyes there, pray to their Atma Mukti, and offer all those leaves in that tree to their deity. Anything that's beautiful, anything that is good, anything that is grand is worthy to be offered to him, and it can always be done even mentally. Yeah, I'm of this habit when I travel and I see a sweet shop where sweets are all prepared and stacked in a very, very beautiful fashion, in a very photogenic fashion. I quickly offer all of them, do this Manasika offering to my Atma Murti. Yeah, so that's something that we can do. When I travel and I see fruit sellers, hawkers, in fact, selling fruits arranged in a very aesthetic way. I'm sure you would have all seen it in transit stations and railway stations and bus stops, where you have these hawkers who sell fruits, and it is very beautifully arranged. I mean, for some of us, we have an irresistible urge to click a picture there, but some of us can even offer it to your own Atma Murti. Nothing wrong. Everything is worthy to be offered to him. It's only for us that we have restrictions. So whatever minimum you can offer, just offer it and he'll be more than happy. Apart from fruits and flowers, vastram, or the clothing for the deity, an abharanam or jewelry, chandanam and nivedyam. This is the most important. Yeah, vastram, abharanam and chandanam. So a few norms here. Vastram, the gods prefer either cotton or silk. If it's silk, it can be reused any number of times. If it is cotton, once you use it, you will have to wash it and then use it. Multicolored ones are accepted, but at your residential level, for an Atma Murti at home, traditions suggest that we use cloths that are only monocolored. Whatever color it is, monocolored. Of course, we don't approve of blue or black, because blue was not even identified as a color here in traditional paintings. Just check out the pictures of Ajanta Ellora or the Big Temple, Tanjavur, the frescoes in the Big Temple. Blue was alien to us till such times we had the colonial powers introducing indigo blue to us. The reason why, though the Chitrakara Sutrams speak about, or the painting, the manual on painting speaks about Krishna to be painted in blue, all that you see is emerald green in the traditional paintings for Krishna. Yeah, so blue was not even used, but today nothing like a rich ink blue. So people prefer it, and there is nothing that stops you. However, black, it's not considered a color because it's nothing but a combination of all the colors, right? I mean, when all the colors merge, it becomes black. So because it's not one color, it is generally to be avoided. But there are gods and goddesses who are very particularly interested in black. So whatever the deity you're worshipping, if there is a cloth which is prescribed, in most cases, it's not like a favorite color for the god. There is nothing favorite for him or her. It's only that color which reflects the quality of the murti, the rasa which the murti mirrors. With Subramanya, we always say he prefers red, be it a piece of cloth or flowers to be offered. Red is his most sought after color for Skanda. The reason being, Skanda is none but Jnana Agni. He is an embodiment of Agni. Agni as in he's not destructive, he is as brilliant as glowing fire. And the fire has this capacity of just, I mean, gulping anything that is sentient, right? I mean, it can just take in everything that is fallen, that falls in it. So Subramanya is like that, that his devotees gain jnana as much as him once they get in touch with him. So, red is the closest possible color to depict fire. And so that's the most sought after color for Subramanya. So likewise, the color chosen for each deity resembles their qualities and characteristics. And that's exactly why we have these chosen list of colors. However, that does not restrict you from offering whatever color you like. And a typical part of puja, the first and the foremost, after you collect all these, requirements, you have a bowl full of water, flowers, fruits, and sandalwood paste, and your murti is there in front of you, and you have your vessels for offering food and doing your abhishekams. The first and the foremost thing to do is to worship Ganesha and your Guru. Ganapati Dhyanam, because he is the Vignaharta, the one who removes obstacles. And to perform a puja by itself is quite a challenge. It's not easy to conveniently perform a puja at any point of time. In fact, in Shiva Puja, there are so many steps, and prior to every step, we invoke certain mantras, astra mantras, to protect us from all the 8 directions. To perform a day's puja is extremely challenging. When I say challenging, our karma is so strong that we will have colorful reasons every day to postpone even starting off your first puja or wanting to continue it every day. We'll just be looking for reasons to, convince ourselves, telling that, well, you wanted to do, but this is the reason that we're not doing well. No problem. Tomorrow maybe. And this tomorrow is never going to come. So we will be having enough obstacles in our way, but it's purely a mindset that we have to win over. And to ensure that once you sit in the puja and there is nothing that's going to obstruct you, we pray to Ganeshwara, Ganapati, and we pray to him and your Guru, because the benevolence that they had has fetched you to this level, has fetched you this blessing, and it has brought you to this level of actually worshipping to a Murti. If you don't have a Guru as of now, you can always pray to Dakshina Murti and start your puja. As I told you, before getting into the actual puja, you will have to purify yourself. That is done by closing your eyes and meditating upon that form of God, whose representation is in front of you as a miniature murti, or as a painting, or a kalasam, or a yantra, or even a special variety of stone. For example, we have Shalagrama or Banalingam and Swarnamukhi stone. So, deities can be represented through special stones also. So if you have that, or a Purna Kumbham in which you have invoked the deity, or a murti or a painting, you close your eyes and pray to the Almighty who's there in this form and request him to purify you. If not for the blessings of the God, you're not going to have we don't have the capacity to purify our inner self. Yeah, so you'll have to meditate upon, and there are a few suggestions that are being prescribed here to meditate upon the flowing Ganga river, to meditate upon the holy Kailasha, to meditate upon the Sabha of Chidambaram. These are all objects, the mere thought of which would purify you. Yeah, I mean, we just go a little emotional at that point. We think about it and we think, well, all these sins that I've done, if at all we have any, and we regret for it, that moment we think that it's purely the mercy of Shiva that has helped us to this level, and we really need to be thankful to him. And what is the best way to be thankful? Just offer this little puja to him. Yeah, so it kind of purifies you. You regret for the mistakes that you've committed, the sins that you've probably committed, and you feel relieved for a moment. Yeah, nothing like feeling sorry for the mistakes that we have done. If you're not able to correct it, I'm sure no damages caused can be corrected completely. Yeah, we only look forward for an apology and try and see to what extent you can set things back. But there will always be this one dent finally, which can never be, corrected. So that will be killing us from inside, and nothing like feeling sorry for it and, regret for the mistake committed. So that can be done at this moment, and you seek his apology and also thank him for being so merciful upon someone like us who've sinned and still we are there too. He's given us a chance to worship. And that is achieved by remembering these holy symbols like Ganga, Nadi, Kailasa Parvatam, or holy cities of Arunachalam and Tiruvarur, and these holy shrines can be thought about, and the very thought would help us come out of the field. Then we open our eyes, request the deity to allow us to offer our prayers. Because we are going to do these upacharams and we pray to him and we thank him for the chance, and you also request him to do the puja. And the next step involves clearing the previous day's puja. So what we call as, the flowers that were offered, the chandanam that was offered, the vastram, the abharanam that was offered, all of it has been blessed by touching the divine physic of the murti. So it becomes much more important to us, and it is to be revered. That is in fact prasadam for us. The flower garland that he wore, the food that was offered to him, the chandanam that was applied on him, all this becomes prasadam for us to revere and partake. So these that were left after the puja from the previous day is called as nirmalyam, and you're supposed to have a separate vessel, a plate or a bowl, to collect all these flowers and keep it in the northeast corner as Chandeshwara Nirmalyam. In any Shiva Puja, the previous day's flower and chandanam and all that is to be offered to Chandesha, and that has got to be, in fact, we have a very clean and a plate for exclusively for collecting the Nirmalyam. It has got to be kept aside from before commencing of the puja, and you clean the altar. Then we start with our actual puja and do all the upacharams and make all the offerings. So how exactly is that done? The offerings, as I told you, samarpanam, that's a most probable word, quite literally means submitting yourself, offering yourself. So the fruit that you offer or a flower that you offer is nothing but a representation of you, because both has seeds in it. It has just come out and it has gone through a natural process to bloom that way. And it is nothing but your own self that you're offering by offering a flower or a fruit. Yeah, so that's something very, very special, in fact. And of late, we become very mechanical in offering flowers and fruits. But every time you drop a flower at the holy feet of the Lord, you've got to imagine that you're offering yourself. And so flowers are to be very particularly procured for puja. If you have a garden, nothing like that. But if you cannot, no worries. You can always procure flowers from vendors. So if there is a possibility of you to visit a temple once a week, procure for the next 1 week. I know that is generally not prescribed. The flowers have got to be plucked every day fresh. Unfortunately, we all have our own constraints. We don't have spaces to have a huge garden or potted plants. And if you can, nothing like that. Balcony gardens and all these are becoming quite easily available. And so if you can, nothing like that. But if you cannot, please don't consider that as a constraint. Buy and procure flowers and store them good enough for at least a week's time, and take what you need for the day. And before you offer it, just sprinkle a spoonful of water on it, considering that to be the water from Ganga, because Ganga Tirtham has its capacity to purify anything. So if that is what is there in your bowl, you can just use that. Request him to consider that as Ganga Tirtham, sprinkle it on the flowers and just offer it to him. It's still fine. Similarly for fruits and dry fruits also. So, just ensure that they are clean, at least to your eyesight. And once it is offered, then when you get it from the god, there again, you will have to use both your hands to take it from there. Because even when offering, you can offer it in one hand, but when you're getting it back, you'll have to be very, very particular about receiving it with both your hands. And you do your puja. And what happens after the puja? So a puja that has got to be, 1 second. Yeah. So the actual process in the puja will involve requesting him and having all the offerings done. Yeah. So you will have to wake the murti up. And in some traditions, we have the complete puja text compiled through pasurams, Tamil poems, or in some cases you have Sanskrit verses, appropriate verses picked from agamas that is compiled for your Shiva puja. Or if you're a Vaishnavite and you do a Shalagrama puja every day, there again, there is a tradition. There are norms about the kind of the number of vessels that you use and what each of the vessel is going to be used for and other things that is very specific for the puja. So here I'm not getting deep into it, but just be informed that you'll bare minimum need 2 cups, one with fresh water to be offered, and another cup where the offered water is collected. Yeah, so at least this will be there. In the Vaishnavite tradition, you will have 5 such cups arranged in a particular fashion, each of it used for a particular purpose. And all the water used for as offering will be collected and stored in a separate vessel, only to be used as, to be distributed as Tirtham after the puja. And in Shiva Puja, we have 2 vessels for Shiva and 1 for Surya and other gods. So it's either 2 or 3 cups that you have, and there will be another pot full of water, which will be used to refill these cups for offering. So once you offer a spoonful of water and request him for the prayers, and you imagine that he has permitted you, the Murti, if you're having a Vigraham, it's got to be very carefully removed from the altar with both your hands, irrespective of what is the size. You know, it's like lifting your kid. So you'll have to lift it very, very slowly from the altar, position him on the on a bowl, a shallow bowl in which the Abhishekam can be performed. And with a bowl of water, again, you perform the Abhishekam. And on a daily basis, I mean, if you cannot do elaborate Abhishekams, at least sprinkling of water is fine, but at least once a week or once a fortnight, just ensure that you keep it regular. And when it is an Abhishekam, try and see if you can have it in a convenient time that all the family members can participate too. Let them also participate, let them help you, assist you, or even perform. So at my place, we just have, a bowl of milk and honey and vibhuti, chandanam and paneer or rose water for everyday Abhishekams. So once that is performed, we are supposed to wipe the Murti. If it's a Shivalinga Murtam, we don't wipe him dry. Yeah, we just pat the Murti with a clean piece of cloth, and that has got to be washed. And we generally have 3 or 4 of them. So every day, the one that is used for wiping the Murti is washed and then dried. Yeah, so we need to have, I mean, even freshly bought cotton handkerchiefs or napkins should do. So have them to wipe your Murti dry. Then we generally use, we adorn the deity with silk and jewelry, and flower and chandanam is offered, and we position the Murti again in there in the altar space. Then we chant pasurams or padigams or verses from the Vedas or stotrams. Yeah, you can always keep a list for yourself. With all the technology available, I know friends who have made exclusive playlists for every day, and that is played and they just follow the text. Yeah, so you can try practicing these things also, but what is required is try and see how much of concentration you can have while chanting these verses. So try also include verses that are simple and easily something that you can understand. Yeah, I mean, there is no fun in chanting verses which are complicated, or that which is very long, or some things that you really don't understand. Yeah, if you're not sure about Sanskrit verses, never mind. At a residential puja level, you can always be happy chanting all the padigams that you have in hand. If you don't know Sanskrit, but you can still read it, still go ahead and read the ashtotrams or stotrams that you can. And if you cannot read it also, play it on your YouTube or your MP3 player and sit in, follow it. 10 days from then, I'm sure you can chant along, and 10 days from then, you can chant all by yourself. Yeah, so I mean, I'm just telling that if you're not really understanding it, or if it's very complicated or it is long, just don't do for the, the fun of doing it. There's nothing that way. Do it with that love so that he understands. It's like, treat it like reading bedtime stories to your little kid. I'm sure you would also enjoy doing it, right? And what if you're going to read something which the kid does not understand or enjoy? Yeah, it does not serve the purpose. So try and keep it very short if you don't have much of time, but ensure that you enjoy reading out those pasurams and the verses, and you understand it, and it stirs some amount of emotion in you. Yeah, once all these padigams and verses are read, then we have what is called as the upacharam phase. And upacharam quite literally means, again, offerings which are very, very specifically made for the deity, like dhupam, deepam, nevedyam, and a karpura harati. Fragrance to be waved in front of the deity, a deepam which has got to be again waved, offering the food preparations that you've made, or fruits and dry fruits, or a cup of milk, or whatever you can offer. You offer, and then finally you do a Karpura Harati. Yeah, the Karpura Harati has got to be performed in order to conclude the session. Why exactly do we do a Karpura Harati? Why exactly do we do a Karpura Harati? It is supposed to represent a camphor that is burning there. Yeah, that's basically your Atman, which kind of merges in the flame. Yeah, the camphor is very, very pure. I mean, in its original version, camphor is supposed to be very pure. If it's impure, it will not burn well. A pure camphor will not, let out soot and all that. So you light the camphor from the lamp which is lit next to the deity. Yeah, and the lamp is supposed to be a representation of the deity himself or herself. The Jyoti there is the god. So you've just managed to light the camphor from the lamp, the fire of which is God himself. So it only means that you have offered yourself completely, and you're just seeing yourself dissolve in the Murti. Yeah, that's the significance of waving a camphor in front of the deity, and that is used to depict offering yourself, seeing yourself dissolve. And finally, there is nothing left. Yeah, the plate which had the camphor, it's empty after it's burnt out, and you don't see both of it. So merging at that level where you don't see yourself, where you've offered yourself completely and there is no you anymore. Yeah, you've merged in it completely. That is what is signified by the camphor that is used to wave. The Karpura Deepam is very, very significant because of that. After the puja is over, yeah, we finally have a few verses which speaks about our ignorance, sometimes even our arrogance, and we tell him that I've only attempted doing something out of the love that I have for you. I'm totally not technically equipped to do all this. Not that I have learned any of these techniques. I don't know any of these mantras. I'm not worthy enough to, pray to you. But you, out of your mercy, has given me this wonderful opportunity on this day to worship you. Yeah, and make these little offerings that I see best fit for you. And we thank him as many number of times as possible for this benevolence that he has on us. Once again, fall flat in front of him as a sign of offering ourselves completely, submitting ourselves. And we take the prasadams and we thank him once again and leave. So the Nirmalyam there again is the prasadam that he has used. Yeah, we take most of it that day. We're not supposed to wipe it clean after the puja. So what we do is we leave some of it at the altar space and only to be removed the next day. So that's how you take the prasadam, and the next day it becomes your Nirmalyam. And the Nirmalyam collected has got to be, it has got to be very, very safely discharged. So whatever can be used can be used. If not, you can store it in a vessel, and probably I've seen some people who are into the practice of making it into biodegradable ways that can be used for plants. If not, at least throw it in some water body or in a near a tulsi plant, or have a box for it to be stored, and then you can discard it. But it is to be respected, for it is nothing less than Shiva Prasadam itself. Yeah, so Nirmalyam has got to be very, very safely treated. And yeah, so in between the puja, as many number of times, however you want to, you can always strike a conversation with the Almighty. Yeah, some of us are the habit of talking with him, all your personal issues after the prayer. Yeah, once it is all over, you again talk to him and say, like, well, these are my prayers, this is happening, that there's a constraint there, please help me here. If something best can happen, it should happen now. So please button, and it's your involvement that can help me. So this is a very, very typical way of offering your daily rituals. I once again reiterate, every tradition has its own norms which we are supposed to follow verbatim. Yeah, and if there is anybody who can customize to you or make it simple to you, it can be only your acharya. But this attempt is only to tell you the parts of a daily typical ritual, and probably help you or assist you attempt one if you're not doing one already. If you don't have an acharyan from whom you can get these suggestions, we're just here to try and tell you, well, this is a very, very generic way of offering your prayers, and you can probably start following it. And for all you know, this puja that you do might fetch in the punyam good enough to help you meet an acharyan, and from there, there's nothing to stop you. So that is about performing your everyday puja for yourself. How about prayers that happens in as a group? I mean, all religions suggest that we get together and pray as a group, right? So under such circumstances, praying in group, has its own benefits. Like yesterday, I was telling about praying to a god at a very, very personal level. You just have a small murti to whom you address all your concerns. Similarly, we also have this tradition of praying in a group. I'm sure we all know the power of unity. Whatever issue it is, united, we stand, right? So when it is one person's thought process, there might be, constraints, doubts, and you might in fact tend to be discouraged. But when you get along as a group, nothing like it. Yeah, you can exchange your views about topics, and somebody might come with a better idea than ours. So under such circumstances, we see that working together as a group has its own benefits. Similarly, once in a while at least, engaging in prayers with other people, either group chanting or, in the Saivite tradition, we have something called as Muttrodal, where hundreds of Shiva Bhaktas get together in an appointed place on an appointed time, and they chant the complete Tiruvasagam or render the complete Tiruvasagam, headed by the senior Oduars who are well versed in the text, and they guide us through chanting the complete Tiruvasagam that day. I should tell you, having attended some of them, it gives a sense of satisfaction which is completely different from what you would get by praying all by yourself at your own house. Yeah, so this is something very, very new that one gets by praying to the Almighty there together. So Muttrodal that happens in today's context, especially post-COVID, I'm very happy to see that several Muttrodal sessions are happening online too. So you can just plug in whenever you can and start following from what they are chanting, and it gives, I wouldn't say the experience is totally what you get from an actual physical Muttrodal, but still, we have these options today. So praying together, and if it's a community that you live in, and if you can convince people for a weekly once prayer session, or where you introduce the next generations for all this, it's really welcome. So if you have a place which can accommodate 5 people, good enough. If you can accommodate only 3, it is still fine. Yeah, don't say that the space constraint is there. If you can accommodate just one more person apart from you, it's still a kuttu prarthana, which has its own benefits. So try and see if you can also engage in these kind of prayers, which involves more people. This can be certainly organized if you have the will to do it. So at community level, or if you're in an apartment and if everybody is okay with it, well, that can happen. Or if there is a temple in your neighborhood where they don't mind people coming and chanting in groups, try and see if you can form a small group and lead at least a weekend session where you read a couple of chants, and you really see the difference once you start doing it. It kind of strengthens you from inside, and there is a feeling of belonging to a group, and there is encouragement from which is mutual, and nothing like getting together and praying. Of late, I'm also seeing this trend where people meet at one particular place in one person's house. They all bring their murtis, their puja murtis, respective puja murtis, and there is a common abhishekam that is performed, and then there is group chanting, and then they decorate their own murtis, and alankaram is done, and they offer food, and then there is a nice meal, and then they leave. I'm not sure what kind of a get-together this is, but I found it very interesting, and I heard that several people abroad are doing it. So you have your own close friend groups. Yeah, you might be bound by similar interests only in doing puja also. For all you know, that can be a field of interest to people too. So I'm sure with the communication techniques that we have today, we are all known to each other. So we know, well, in this neighborhood, these are the other people who do daily puja like me, and they also have a murti and they do alankaram and they celebrate festivals. They get along, and there are so many such groups where they meet once in a while in one person's house. They all bring their murtis, and there is a common abhishekam, and it is quite a I mean, it's a sight to behold. In fact, to see like half a dozen murtis seated in different abhishekam plates, and an abhishekam being performed to all of them at the same time, and then they all do their alankarams, and there is chant together and worship, whatnot. It is just too amazing. And if there are, I mean, I'm just to say that you can also socialize through your puja. I mean, with changing times, something which does not really hamper traditions, it can still be done. For that matter, at Shaiva Adinam, Dharmapuram Adinam, on special occasions and on Guru Puja days, they conduct such Shiva Puja, wherein all the devotees who've come there to participate in the festival, they have their assigned place. One hall or a corridor in the temple inside the mutt will be earmarked for this, and each of us will be given a position, I mean a space for ourselves, 4 feet by 4 feet, and we carry all our murtis and puja patrams, food offerings, flowers, chandanam, tirtham, oil and wick for your lamp, and all that will be provided by the Adinam, and we all do the Shiva Puja together. And it's a sight again to see like hundreds of people sitting all around the temple in a very, very organized fashion and performing a Shiva Puja. And it is a tradition that Guru Maha Sannidhanam visits the campus at that time. He comes to the corridor where the Shiva Puja happens and worships all the Shiva Bhaktas doing their respective Shiva Puja. So getting together and worshipping or chanting has its own power, and it can be felt by actually participating in it. And Kuttu Prarthana is one area where you can also pray for others. Sure, you would have your own good friends to whom you request when there is an actual need for a prayer. When there are complicated situations, medical complications, going through something that is very pressing, we request our friends and family, and we tell them, just have me in your prayers, or have a prayer for me. And nothing as powerful as that. If you feel it would embarrass you, well and good, you can just tell them, I'm in need of some prayers, just pray for me. You need to elaborate it, but nothing like someone else praying for you, or your own colleague or classmate or neighbor who's going through you really feel good about such little acts that you can always do. And once you bring it into a regular practice, nothing like that. So chanting as a practice is a very, very powerful tool. Then we just discussed about everyday prayers, a little on festivals that comes. A Hindu's typical calendar is just filled with festivals. Yeah, apart from national holidays and regional holidays, and we have restricted holidays, whatnot. Just to say that there are too many festivals, and it's mostly concentrated between June, July, all the way up to Jan and Feb. And there are other families who have their own other festivals, because from March you will have temple festivals, which we start visiting. Yeah, from June, July, the onset of monsoon, we have festivals to be celebrated at home. And after Shivaratri, it is mostly festivals in different temples, and we start visiting temples to attend these festivals. So a calendar for a typical Hindu, an annual calendar, is just filled with festivals, with each of it very colorful and very beautifully done. And the prasadams that are prepared matches with the weather condition, the climatic conditions then, and the flowers that are exclusively to be used for each festival those that are available during those times. And each festival has a number of days to be celebrated. There is always a day before the festival, after the festival, setting up for the festival, getting yourself ready, and after the festival, packing up and feeling that the tiredness that comes along, and then rejuvenating yourself for your regular course. I tell you, nothing like it. Each festival comes as a package, and it will be tiresome, of course, to celebrate it per se, but the day the celebration happens and the days after it and the memories that it leaves behind are, it's just amazing that you actually want to bother yourself the next year also to celebrate it in a better way, if not the same way. So our festivals are, it includes religious aspects, it includes social, cultural aspects, it includes your, there is no festival where you don't share your happiness with your friends and relatives. Yeah, whatever little prasadams that you do or little sweets that you do, we always share it with your neighbors and relatives. And each festival has its own Puranic significance also. Yeah, I mean, every festival, it might be something like, Sri Jayanti, which is the birth hour of Krishna that is to be remembered and we celebrated because he was born and, we were freed of all the asuras who were ruling from here. And most festivals are about good over bad and good winning. So, once you start celebrating it after knowing the significance, you get strengthened every time you celebrate it. I'm sure we'll all be facing challenges at different times of life, and every day there may be something minor, and once in a while we'll have periodical serious issues, whatnot. I mean, we have enough complications at our own level. So these festivals and the prayers that you make on festival days, think about the reason of celebrating the festival, and I'm sure you'll be strengthened from inside. I mean, the world had seen worse things. There have been times when nasty things have been happening, and all that they could do was to pray. And what I'm going through now is not at least as bad as that. And so let me also pray, and that will bring in a kind of a psychological support. Yeah, but the strength that you gain there should be good enough to enhance your thoughts. Yeah. So a Hindu festival calendar spread across the year with months and weeks, fortnightly, whatnot. So it's just, it's yeah. And then celebrating festivals. Okay. So talking about everyday rituals, I was telling you about how it's all about some flowers and fruits, and that's good enough to do your daily rituals. I'm sure celebrating every festival is going to, it'll have its own constraint, physical, financial, whatnot. Try and see at a family level if you can keep the essence of the festival alive and not worry yourselves about celebrating it grand. Whatever best you can for the day is what is required. Yeah, there is absolutely nothing about being extravagant about it or forcing to celebrate it grand just because the society wants it, or just because Instagram shows your friends and family celebrating it in a fashion, forcing yourself or your kith and kins to do it in that way. That's not required. You're not, I mean, the ultimate aim there is to relish the thoughts and, cherish those moments, because God is there who's helped you. And we're just remembering the way he helped his other devotees. And we are assuring ourselves that, yes, he's there for us too, whenever we need him. So if that is what is to be the basic thought process there. So, because I hear from a lot of families speak about how, it's quite taxing at a physical level, and sometimes at a mental level, sometimes at a financial level, sometimes at various different levels. So, it's not at all about making it expensive. It's about the thought that goes into the commitment that goes into it, the way you can plan and execute something which is pocket friendly, and that which ensures happiness at your house, at your home that day. Yeah, just don't bother about what your neighbor is going to think. We are not supposed to be thinking about it for anything. And here, in case of festivals, absolutely no problem. It's not at all about being extravagant. Just think about it. I'm sure we can all devise our own plans for festivals and the way we would like to celebrate it. Yeah, the concept of fasting, that is an integral part of most festivals, if not all. But fasting, it's not about just being hungry and keeping yourself up and thinking that you're doing something big. The concept of fasting on festival days should happen in a very subconscious level. We're supposed to be engaging ourselves in activities like preparing for the festival. Yeah, collecting flowers, buying what is required, cleaning your house, preparing the altar space, installing the murti and the worship, inviting people, chanting. And these are all the activities that takes precedence for that day. And you're so packed that you actually don't find time to eat. Yeah, so fasting should happen, that way, in a way that you don't find time to eat, that it loses its precedence. It's not about staying hungry. It's not about eating a lot of fruits and milk and just sleeping through the day, convincing yourself that you're fasting for the day, and then get very tired and lazy and you screw up the complete essence of the festival. That's not how it is to happen. Eat light if you cannot fast full. There is absolutely nothing wrong in it. Yeah, God does not demand that you fast and you go through the pain of being hungry. That's not at all a part of Hindu school of fasting. It is either health based. Yeah, once a fortnight you fast for a pradosham or an ekadasi. If you're able enough, if your physical conditions permits you to do it, well and good, with enough medical suggestions, you can go with it. Or if you can eat only, I mean, if you want to just nourish yourself with some fruits and milk, it's still fine. What is required is keeping yourself engaged on that day, doing activities that would keep you reminded of God and His qualities and His mercies as long as possible. Yeah. So when you're doing something and you actually feel hungry, that moment you think, well, it is for this reason that I'm staying hungry, and I should be engaging in continuing what I'm doing. Yeah, I mean, it can be something like drawing a big rangoli for the day, or preparing your flower garlands, or preparing food delicacies. You're just too extremely busy that you don't find time. You don't think spending your time in eating is worthy enough for that day. I'm sure all our festivals have their own menu, and the beautiful delicacies that are prepared. At the end of the day, after the festival, nothing like sitting with your family and sharing whatever prasadam that was done. And I tell you, it tastes extra special after it is offered to the gods. Yeah. So if you cannot fast, please don't bother yourself. If you can, go ahead and do it, but try and see every time your stomach pricks you, think of the deity that moment. Yeah, you're fasting for him. Nothing like getting your thoughts on him extended for more time. Yeah. Participation of family members in any festival is extremely important. Try and see what role each of them can play and engage them as much as possible. The last topic of discussion, temples. So we've spoken about a Manasika Puja, spoken about a festival, a puja for ourselves at a family level, how to do a typical puja, what happens on special festival days. The next, your puja kind of gets extended into your temple visit also. So the concept of temple, it's like the heavenly abode that is just landed on this earth to ensure that we are blessed from a close proximity. Yeah, so that's exactly a koil. It's the residence, the earthly residence of the heavenly God. And then it is also called as alayam, where A here denotes your atma. That place where your atma dissolves. Layam here is to engage. Layikkardu appdin Tamilல சொல்லுவோம் இல்லையா அந்த வார்த்தை. So here it means to engage, to dissolve in it and completely forget yourself. So the experience that you should be getting out of visiting a temple should be good enough to engage you so much with the God that you dissolve yourself there. The architecture of temples, especially traditional Hindu temples, it's so demanding and it is so particular about following set codes, just in case, to ensure that the philosophy is brought out through the architecture that has been put to use. So, I'm sure you would have all visited some grand temples here in India, and all these ancient ones like Madurai or Srirangam or Tiruchi or Tiruvarur or Chidambaram. All these temples, they are really huge. You have imposing gopurams that welcomes you, but somehow the street that leads to the gopuram is pretty narrow, and it's filled with markets on either sides selling goods that are very distracting. And so that is supposed to represent the physical world that we are caught in. Yeah, we think it's very colorful, we think it's entertaining, but you should know that it is certainly not peaceful. The distractions that you have are way too many, and you have enough constraints. So these narrow lanes filled with shops on either sides represent the physical world to which we are attached so closely. But the moment you enter the gopuram, you step into a huge, vast, wide courtyard, so well lit, and it is beautifully ventilated, so comfortable that just the threshold makes the difference between the two different spheres. Yeah, so the physical world is the market that's outside the narrow lanes that leads to the temple, and that which is close to God is how the courtyard feels. Then you walk through a series of mandapams. You just notice that the size of the mandapam reduces, the natural lighting also reduces. Be informed that you are moving towards something which is not clearly visible. So as you go closer to the sanctum sanctorum, the lighting kind of reduces totally. When you're standing at the entrance of the sanctum, it's pitch dark. That's supposed to be the representation of your hridaya, which is dark. We have not ventured into it. How many of us have walked into ourselves? Yeah, so that's supposed to be your hridayam, the core. And the God is, of course, enshrined there, but Then you have lamps that are lit, and you have an acharyan there, the priest, who waves a lamp lit in front of the murti, and that's when we get to see the murti, who was till then blanketed in the darkness. So the priest there is your acharyan, your guru, who teaches you how to envision the deity who is from within. Yeah, so it's only then that you face what we consider as satyam or ultimate truth, and the deity is bejeweled. It's when there are the fresh flowers that are there, and it is just beautified to the best extent possible. Yeah, so truth is after all very beautiful. It's brilliant. It's shining. It's in all its glory. Till then it was dark, but with the help of a guru, when he enlightened you, you get to see the murti that's there, the ultimate truth that is there. So the reason why we insist that we follow temple architectural principles as much as possible is because there is a philosophy behind it, and it is this experience that you get that has got to be thought about every time you walk into an ancient temple and come out. Yeah, only by that your philosophy kind of enhances. Apart from that, temples have been the center for socio-cultural activities. Everybody will have that one temple in their village to which all their landmark events, milestone events in their life was happening. In fact, temples are venues for naming ceremony, wedding ceremonies, and your Aksharabhyasam, anything important in your life. I mean, including your remembrance days being celebrated. Yeah, temples used to be the venue. So all of us were associated with temple. So the divinity component in the temple, it's there, but apart from that, there is this philosophical aspect which we'll have to really keep munching every time you visit a temple. So other features like water bodies, sculptures, colonnades, the play with light and shadow, architectural hierarchy, as in the sizes of the gopurams increasing and decreasing, and the east-west, north-south axis being maintained, huge mandapas starting from 16-pillared and 4-pillared and 200 and even 1,000-pillared mandapas. Yeah, each of it becoming a gallery during special occasions. Beautiful mural paintings that are done. All of these are educative components which enhances your experience. The architectural principles, hierarchy, balance, symmetry, asymmetry, colors, color combinations, waterscapes, landscape, light and shadow play, mass and void, empty space and filled up space. All these beautiful architectural principles have been perfected over years, and you have them as manuals which are to be followed during temple construction, which helps you reach a level of peacefulness once you go in. Visit a temple which is still with its old world charm without any modern intrusions. You'd be very balanced, and there'll be peace around you. Yeah, as opposed to even an ancient temple with all these modern intrusions. Yeah, so all these principles were time tested and advised to be followed to enhance our experience. So visiting a temple, apart from engaging at your own level, the family time that you have in a temple, at least once a week, ensure or promise yourself that you're going to visit a temple with your family members. Go there, and at the beginning stages, even discuss your family issues. That's still fine, but ensure that temple is a venue for your family to meet at least once a week. Even if it's a family of just 3 or 4, it makes no difference. Or if you're just a couple, please still, engage your family discussions in a temple. And by doing that, you just prove a point to your kids that, well, the temple is an important venue where important decisions are taken, important discussions are made. That's one way of psychologically getting them attached to a temple. And there are always these discussions about dress codes to be followed, how you behave in a temple and other things. Let me tell you, a temple is a common place. So I think the temple management should come with a plan which is acceptable for all of us. That's exactly why they do not prescribe clothing which is not accepted by many of us. People from different age groups come there. Modesty probably should be the key there. And apart from that, I'm not getting into the details. Vouching for, there cannot be a dress code in a temple and other things. I mean, it's one's own will and wish. For such people, I only, request them to think about other people who come there also. Yeah, considering a temple as a place where many people meet, people from different backgrounds, people from, different cultural backgrounds, people from different age groups. They all come there with an idea to pray, and probably our dressing shouldn't be distracting, and probably we should use modesty as the thumb rule there. So offerings to be made in a temple, ensure you carry whatever you can when you visit a temple, even if it's just 2 flowers that you can offer, please. And when you go with kids, ensure that you give it to them and ask them to hand it over to the priest. So offerings to the god is a mandate. In fact, Dharma Shastram says, when you visit people who are sick, when you visit families where there are kids, when you visit people who are old, and when you visit your guru and gods, you're not supposed to go empty-handed. Whatever you can, even if it's just 2 bananas, please get that and give it to them. That's a mandate in our tradition. And have a moment of prayer for yourself in the shrines that you visit. Ensure that you don't pray with your eyes closed in front of the deity. When you stand in front of the deity, you're there to get the complete view and just drink it over and store it within you. Yeah, after standing in a queue for like 2 hours and going and standing in front of the deity and closing your eyes makes no sense. In fact, the deity's eyes will look at us from anywhere. We are supposed to look back at him because it's something called as Nayana Dhikshay. So it's through his eyes that he initiates us. So ensure that you don't close your eyes in front of the gods that you visit. You can always come out, stand in front of the Vajastambam, close your eyes and pray. If you think it's easier for you to concentrate after closing your eyes, pretty well do it in front of the Vajastambam, not in front of the Sanctum Sanctorum. That completes today's session and of course the workshop in total. I think we've discussed about puja and its components today, the various stages, offerings to be made, and how you can probably start doing it. The importance of Nirmalyam. I time and again keep talking about it because if there is a mistake committed in a puja, it is in good probability that you do it with your Nirmalyam. Ensure that the flowers and fruits and other things that are offered are discharged with due respects. We also discussed about the importance of groups and how to celebrate them and the benefits that you get. Finally, about temples and their symbology and how you can engage your family both for a personalized prayer and a group prayer in temples. Yeah, puja and its significance. On the first day, we were just talking about how important a prayer is, what are the different kinds of prayers, how important gods are and what are the different kinds of gods, and the various philosophies that speaks about whether God was manifested or did he create other gods, and all those popular questions that we have. We've also discussed about how to do a puja, why do we do a puja, and what do we do a puja with. Aesthetics in performing your daily puja is something that whatever level possible we can still maintain. Simple cleanliness, simple objects, yeah, simple space is good enough, but just have some amount of interest in keeping it aesthetically acceptable. The love that you have end of the day is what is puja. Time and again, most of these saints have spoken about how a puja is nothing but exhibiting your love for the Almighty. So if you've understood at least a few of these, and if there is some interest kindled in you to carry these with you, to be put to practice, and if you're going to spend the rest of the weekend thinking about redesigning your puja room if it needs, decluttering it if there is a requirement, keeping it simple but aesthetic, and start doing a simple puja at least every day with chants and minimum offerings possible. That I would say is the success of this workshop. I'm sure this is not over here. You would all have your own doubts. You would all want to, I'm sure you would all be having your own questions and what to chant, customizing your puja and other things. Feel free to get in touch with me. I'd be more than happy to assist you with, whenever I can. Yeah, with that, I would like to conclude the session. But before completing it, I'd like to make 2 announcements. That's the forthcoming workshop. It's a 2-day seminar that I'm conducting next weekend. That's on the 30th and the 31st of October. And it happens between 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. 6:30 to 7:30 Indian Standard Time. And this is going to be on the magnificent temple called Srirangam. Sure, you would have all heard about it. The art and architecture of Srirangam. I'll be talking mostly on the visual and the performing arts that is there, which includes painting, sculpture, bronzes, jewelry that is used, more importantly, the ritual vessels the rituals that are performed there, and the festivals that are conducted. Yeah, so I'll not be talking about Sthala Puranam, nothing on the temple planning. We'll not be visiting all the shrines. I mean, this is in fact a prelude to a more detailed 10-day session on Srirangam, which will include all these aspects much later. But this is just a prelude. So first 2 days, it's going to be on the art and architecture of Srirangam temple through different ages. And this also needs a registration. You can get more details from my website, madhukalai.com, madhukalai.com. And there are other webinars that I've conducted so far, which can also be watched in my website. And if you need more details about it, again, you can feel free to contact me through my website or my email ID. The next workshop for TFL is scheduled for the end of November. It's another 3-day workshop where we're going to be talking about Shaiva Siddhanta. It's an introduction to Shaiva Siddhantam, because you're certainly not going to learn Shaiva Siddhantam in like 3 days or even in a lifetime for that matter. But it is an introduction to Shaiva Siddhantam as an age-old philosophy. And that is going to happen again as a Zoom webinar. And the details are already out. That's the brochure that you see on the screen. And the registration has also been put up in their website. So here I will be talking about the basics of Shaiva philosophy. What is so specifically special about Siddhanta? What is Siddhanta, in fact, and basic tenets, philosophy, a little of the history of Shaiva Siddhanta, and on temples, devotees, works. So this will be a completely basic level introductory session, and we're planning to have more detailed versions of each of the topic much later. But I'm sure for people who have learned Shaiva Siddhanta also, you might have some basic doubts. You can always register and get it cleared here. This will again be a 1-hour session. Just that we've just changed the time from 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Malaysia time, which is 5 p.m. Indian Standard. So the the Malaysian time and the Indian time. So Malaysia 5 to 6 p.m. Indian time. Yeah. So basics on Shaiva Siddhantam, about temples, murtis, devotees, discuss. So a big thanks and to my good friend Priyanka Raman and Kasturi for having put this up and coordinate a topic which is I've page and other social, make a note of it or follow. Inbox me questions there also, but questions I may take some time to reply to it. Yeah, so please consider my time and give me some time to get back to you, but I'll definitely reply to your queries through my Instagram inbox or my website also. Yeah. Thank you, and hope to meet you again all in the November session on Shaiva Siddhantam. For people who are interested in registering for the Srirangam webinar, please do get in touch with me. I'll help you for the registration. Murthy Ellam Vali, Yengal Mona Guru Vali, Arul Vartha Endrum Vali, Anbar Vali Parabarame. Ellam Sri Tyagaraja Kripai, Sri Tyagaraja Maharajo Vijayate, Arura Tyagesa. Thank you. I'd like to get started with a question. Yeah, thanks for your participation. There is also this, a feedback form. So the link is there in the chat box. Please do give your feedback. It will help us, work for our forthcoming seminars. A question from Dr. Kasturi. Can flowers without fragrant smell be offered for prayers? Example, Kanakambaram. There is nothing particular about not offering it, in fact, but there are a few flowers which are not to be offered to a few deities because there is a Puranic reason or an Agamic reason behind it. So if it's Kanakabaram, that is all that you get, you can surely offer it. But when you get jasmine, why do you want to go for Kanakabaram? As Thiruvalluvar says, Kani iruppa kai kavarndakku. Ritvik, hello, is there any restriction on using Kunkumam for Shiva as Ambal is also together with him? You can certainly use Chandanam and Kunkumam, both can be used in a Shiva Puja. Nothing stops you from that. From Dr. Kasturi, slightly off topic, but what are your thoughts about clicking pictures of the Garbhagraha Murtis in temples? Well, Agamas don't speak about cameras or not using them and other things, but the convincing reply that a few temple priests have given me so far, because I've also had this doubt and dilemma. So they say that a murti enshrined in a temple is very particularly, and he's very exclusive for that temple. So there can be only one such murti ever. If you're going to make copies of it through photographs, through clicking photos and making multiple prints of it, then it will only reduce the divinity component not on the murti, but from the thoughts of devotees. Yeah, I mean, if you need to have a Tyagaraja Darshanam, you should really be determined to come to Tiruvarur, make all your plans, spend some time for him, come there and then worship him. If you're going to get an everyday footage of the pujas that are being performed there, I'm sure most of us over a period of time wouldn't really want to take all the pains to go there and actually do it. They just want to try and see if it can be restricted. Now there might be a part B question to it, telling about how then paintings of these murtis. Well, there a chitrakara or a painter, an artist, sits there and engages in a meditative mode with the deity to make a copy of it, unlike a picture that is clicked and then printed. So it's like a which looks like him. You can always make a murti similar to Raja and install it in any temple and worship it. Yeah, you can do all the alankarams, all that is possible. But a picture of the temple worship would only mean that it becomes very easy for everybody to have one. And that at that point, I mean, after a point of time, it might reduce the interest in devotees. Now that's going to be disastrous. And so just in case to help us there, they ban in some temples. From Ritvik, could you throw some light on Shakti worship? Is it the same as what you had mentioned? That's Samudram by itself, Sri Vidyai, or in any form you want to worship Devi, it demands a lot of specific thoughts and specific learning. I am afraid that I might not be able to really throw some light as such here. There are traditions in Devi worship which is similar to Shiva Puja that's performed, and there are parts of it which is different also. The philosophy is slightly different, so the rituals and puja that are done will also be different. At this level, this is the amount of light that I can throw on it. From Dishna, when offering prasadam, have heard people say to cook without salt. Is there any reason? Thank you. Well, you can use the crude salt that you get. There is no norm which says that you're not supposed to use salt. There are particular temples, particular deities, but you shouldn't in fact use salt, but that's not a general thumb rule for all. Some people who propose this idea, I've also had a word with them and asked them, why do you say so? They say all the ingredients are fine. To add a lot of salt, it's going to spoil the food. And the food that's prepared for God, you cannot taste it before offering, right? The final taste that you have before serving your guest, probably even by tradition, even that's a sin. Yeah, if you have guests at home preparing for them, it's like offering God. You're not supposed to taste. But yeah, today we've reached a lot of norms. So it's the quantity of salt that you're. So for gods, they suggest that you make these sweets. So they're adding salt. So in any case, it would be good. I mean, if there is excess sweet, it is still fine. But if the salt is more, you cannot put up with it, right? So they say avoid salt in any food that you make, and that is purely for our own convenience. Yeah, there are gods to whom there are occasions where you prepare without salt. That's totally different. But making it as a general thumb rule is purely for our convenience to ensure that we don't spoil the food by adding extra salt. Yeah, so there is no standard norm for all gods that way. I think I've answered all the questions. And thank you once again. Thank you, Priyanka, and thank you, Dr. Kasturi. Hope to see you all in the forthcoming